happened. That conversation never took place. That that she never heard everything that I had just said. So she just occasionally she would ask me about this new boyfriend that I had that I was sleeping with, and regarding the religion aspect, she just kind of forgot about it, and well, she turned a blind eye on it. And it was also quite a challenging period for me after I told her all of that, because I started reliving some of the trauma that I had experienced before, like especially all the religious like doctrine and all the negative emotions that I faced as a child but never really had the means to address or to express them.
I was impressed with Dewi's head-on approach to bearing it all to her mother. I've had my own share of revealing conversations with my parents, but never anything where I brought up everything controversial that I'm doing. It seemed like Dewi really wanted to get as much as she could off her chest. At the same time, this was still a Skype conversation. I could see from her mother's perspective that because she wasn't seeing and needing to immediately deal with a new reality that Dewi had presented to her, that it would have been easy to shelve this conversation away and assign it to the deal with this later pile. But this led me to my next question for Dewi. What happens now when you go back to Indonesia? Do you still go to church? Do you talk with your mom or your parents or your brothers about religion?
Yeah, so with my with my oldest brother, I sometimes would share these things. I would tell him that I'm not religious anymore. But with my mother, I just sort of naturally continue pretending that I remain a Catholic. I wouldn't, start off a conversation about churches or about Jesus with her or about Christmas. But whenever I'm in Indonesia and whenever it's time for her to go to church, she would just sort of automatically assume that I would go with her. And I would go with her because I know that maybe she just doesn't have the capacity, like the emotional capacity to accept or to reconsider what she had heard like years before. And I think maybe she also felt that, oh no, Dewi has changed. Like, okay, she might have told me that she wasn't religious or she wasn't going to church anymore, but she might have like changed her direction, and finally she was led back to church or to Jesus or whoever.
I guess if you're still going to church, then that's exactly the way that it looks.
Yeah, I know. And
I could understand Dewi wanted to keep the peace when she was visiting Indonesia. I've made the same choice many times myself during brief visits to my family. First of all, you know you're only there for a little while, and you want to enjoy your time and for others to enjoy their time with you. Short visits home are often not the best time to remind your family members of just how different you've become over the years. But, at the same time, for those of us who will continue to live far away from our families, all we have are short visits once every few years. If we don't use these infrequent opportunities in person to show who we really are, when will we be able to be truly who we are? As Dewi is about to demonstrate, change, like any kind of learning, requires repetition and reinforcement.
And I remember about a year ago, I tried to tell her again, I tried to, like nowadays, if I try to share my opinion that does not really correspond to her belief, I try to do it gradually. Like I would try to just start with baby steps, really. And one time she was inviting me to pray rosary with her, and I kind of told her that, no, I don't really feel like it, and I don't really believe that it's an important part of life. And I don't believe that it's for everybody. Like maybe we're different, right? Maybe, yeah, you're more into praying regularly and I'm more into, I don't know, expressing my faith in different ways and helping people and trying to change laws. But even something as small as that, she couldn't take, she couldn't really accept the fact that I don't agree with her religious upbringing or her religious teachings as a parent. It's a bit frustrating sometimes, and I keep shaming myself for wow, on the one hand I'm quite an outspoken person among my peers, among my colleagues, among my friends, but on the other hand, when it comes to my family, especially when it comes to my mother, I've always been quite a coward for some reason.
Well, I mean, family is the most difficult relationship to change.
Yeah.
it might seem like it should be easy, but it really isn't. The people who are closest to us are the people that we actually have the hardest time being ourselves with, because there's so much at stake, and there's so many facets that are linked, and there's so much shared history, and there's so much shared meaning. As much as we don't want there to be shared meaning, there has to be.
Yeah.
I think that you are in very, very good company if you find being with your family difficult. I thought about how much I departed from my Chinese identity in the years that I'd spent living in distinctly non-Asian places. I thought about how much perspective I'd gained from the places I'd traveled to and the people I'd met along the way, and how much I was challenged to grow beyond the worldview I'd originally espoused when I first left my family home. So naturally, I wanted to ask Dewi if she still conceived of herself as being Indonesian. I found it interesting that to answer this question, Dewi started to describe the bureaucratic challenges in the Netherlands that we alluded to before.
In the first 2-3 years of me living in the Netherlands, I felt very much as a Westerner, or at least as a world citizen, as somebody who identified with everybody regardless of their skin color or the color of their passport, as I like to say it. But when I finally graduated, I started having issues with my residency, because as a non-European, you could not easily find an employer or a job where the employer could also sponsor your legal residency. And it was very difficult to circumvent the regulations, really, because there's so much paperwork to be done. And also it was just a bureaucratic nightmare. And it was quite a long nightmare as well, because I got married with this boyfriend that I was sleeping with, and that I told my mother about that. So even though I was finally married with a Dutch person, we spent quite a lot of money and so many days filling out forms and trying to get the help of a lawyer and things like that. But it was just too difficult and too expensive to try to maintain my residency in the Netherlands. And that was really the moment within those 2 years or so. I felt lost, in terms of, not only in terms of my administrative identity, but also.
Oh my goodness, what is your administrative identity?
Yeah.
I'm in process.
Yeah.
Wow.
but of course it's just, but
I mean, I understand. As a non-European living in Europe,
Yeah.
I totally understand. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, what we had, was nothing compared to other people who are just in this limbo for years and years and years, right? So yeah, within those 2 years of struggling to find a way to prolong the residency, I think I felt lost in terms of my identity, as a world citizen, or as a European, or even because, of course, I followed Dutch news or followed developments inside Europe, and so I felt like I was quite part of the society.
It seemed like the challenges Dewi had left behind in Indonesia, the unresolved relationship with Lydia, maintaining the pretense of still being Catholic, keeping her sexuality under wraps, now combined with the difficulty of having her rights recognized as an Indonesian in the Netherlands, caused Dewi to develop some feelings of resentment for her country of origin.
The thing is that with Indonesia, I feel like I despise it, but I also miss it at the same time. I despise the community in which I grew up in, but also miss it very much. I miss the, rituals, or this collective sense of community, and just the traditions and all these small things that you start thinking of when you're just desperately sitting there in front of a bunch of forms and trying to just find a way to how the hell am I going to stay here, right? And at the same time also I felt very, very afraid of having to go back to Indonesia because of my sexuality. And I think by that time I had also partly come out as a bisexual, in front, among my peers and all that. I felt quite comfortable identifying and just expressing myself, my sexuality and all that. But on the other hand, I was very, very afraid of having to go back to Indonesia, especially because I think in the past 5 to 7 years or so, you started seeing more negative attitudes towards like LGBT community, and you started seeing all these like banners saying, like, oh, LGBT, you go to hell, you're not welcome here. And so it's really creepy. And
I turn again to Wikipedia to capture the current reality of LGBTQ rights in Indonesia. Indonesian law does not protect the LGBTQ community against discrimination and hate crimes, nor does it recognize same-sex marriage. In some parts of the country, homosexuality is illegal under Islamic Sharia law and punishable by flogging. The importance in Indonesia for social harmony leads to duties rather than rights to be emphasized, which means that human rights broadly, including LGBTQ rights, are very fragile. Despite this, the LGBTQ community in Indonesia has steadily become more visible and politically active. Coming out to family and friends is seldom undertaken by LGBTQ people in Indonesia, as they're afraid of rejection and social backlash. Nevertheless, there are some rare examples of understanding and acceptance by the families of LGBTQ people. I wondered if Dewi's family might be one of them. In the meantime, Dewi was still blocked by the Dutch government from being able to stay in the Netherlands, and that's when she and her husband decided to make a bold move. They loaded up an old car with all their belongings and drove themselves and their dog from northwestern Europe to northern Africa, specifically to the capital of Morocco, Rabat. When I first found out about this epic move they were making, driving across continents, I didn't understand Dewi and her husband's reasoning for moving to Morocco. But it seems I wasn't the only friend who needed an explanation. Dewi walked me through her process.
After having experienced all that, well, my partner and I, my husband and I, we finally got like tired, and we just gave up like all the, these procedures of trying to stay in the Netherlands, and we decided to leave the Netherlands. That's how we finally decided to move to Morocco. And I must say, since I moved to Morocco, I felt more and more in touch with my Indonesian roots as well. It might be because of, the religion aspect of it, like the Islamic traditions, or the fact that I'm surrounded by Muslims, or like Muslim traditions and all that. And also the fact that it's just much more of a collective. There's more of this sense of community, I think, here in Morocco. Yeah, which is less visible in the Netherlands, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I noticed when I visited you in Morocco is how friendly people are. And I'm a Canadian, right? So I'm used to people being friendly in Canada, but in Morocco, it was a different kind of friendliness. Like people looked at you, you would say salam alaikum, they would say alaikum salam back to you. And it was just this wonderful, constant exchange of these micro interactions. And it just felt like a much more close-knit community as opposed to North. When I came back to Berlin, it was like, I was only in Morocco for like 10 days. And when I came back to Berlin, I was like, oh man, this is culture shock. I lived in the same building for 3 years and I don't know my neighbors. Yeah. And in Morocco, you go down like onto the street and, before long, everyone knows you. Yeah, especially because you're very clearly the foreigners there.
Yeah, no, definitely, and I guess maybe it's also because I felt like personally betrayed by the Dutch system. Really, I just felt like, I thought I could live here and just build a life here and be finally like free, like live relatively free life, but of course. What is freedom, right? And you might have like the freedom to kiss like women in public, but you also have to pay a lot of bills and very high expenses for daily food and transportation and things like that. And so I think it finally occurred to me that life in the Netherlands at the time, for me and my husband particularly, was just too filled with like stress and tasks that distract you from the things that really matter, right? Connection with other people and a sense of community and just this daily dose of micro interactions and things like that. So, and also the weather, of course, it makes a huge difference and the food. And so, yeah.
If you enjoy Beyond Asian and you'd like to hear more stories being produced here in Europe, then you'll be happy to know there is so much more where this came from. Bay Radio is Berlin's English-speaking podcasting network and community and home to a number of incredible shows. If you'd like to hear more about the thinkers and creators who propel our culture, then look no further